Okay, and hi everybody, and today I'm making my famous whole grain bread. And I'm starting with those wonderful kernels of organic non-GMO red 5-feet wheat. And my dear hubby gave me a Vitamix with a grain basket, so I put 2 ladles in that, not more, because I find it gets better with it. I don't want to get it too hot because the heat would damage the protein and the fats, especially in the kernels, which I of course want, and they're low gluten anyway. So most gluten sensitive people, not celiacs, tolerate this bread that I'm baking today. I'll switch the Vitamix on to grind the flour, but please be advised it is very loud for those that have never heard it. That's the stuff in my oven. Now the Vitamix is coming. So it takes about 20 seconds, and afterwards the wheat is grinded nicely, and it's 100% whole wheat, and I put it in with what I already done, and then I do another one. And I make always 2 bread at the same time, so that's why I have so much. And I always let the Vitamix cool down in between. It's not for the benefit of the Vitamix, because the Vitamix would switch itself off when it gets too hot, but I do not want the flour to heat up too much. So I'll switch it off for now, and I'll be back when all the flour is grinded. Ground, I think it says. Okay, friends, I'm back, and now comes the fun part. Here is my trusted scale, a very good one, because I weigh a lot. And here's my tried and trusted recipe. And if you like the video and you want the recipe, feel free to comment in the comments, and I'll send you the receipt for free. Now, on that scale goes my container with a lid. And I have a scale that I can set back to 0, so I don't have to calculate the weight of the container. I recommend that too. So now I'll put on my flour that I just ground, and for one bread it would be 227 grams of flour. But since I'm making 2, I take twice the amount, which is 554. Doesn't matter by the gram exactly, but you should be pretty accurate. So then there's 2 brie doughs. Okay, it's about to get halfway decent. Okay, one is called the Sauer and the other one the Biga. Now we'll make the Sauer. And the Sauer has, besides the flour, salt. And I use Himalayan salt. And it's 5 grams per loaf, so I use 10 grams for 2 loaves. I'll get rid of the little things. And it's quite important to measure that quite accurately, because you don't want the bread totally salted and you don't want it without any salt, because Himalayan salt has a lot of nutrients. For example, it has only 80% sodium chloride, and all the rest, now back on the scale, is trace minerals. Now back to 0. And for one bread you would use, if you have flour that you bought that is older, you would use 250 gram yogurt or about 200 grams of milk or buttermilk. Since my flour is fresh, it needs more. And I have 2 loaves too. And what I use is yogurt. I buy the one that's 50% off at the end of its best before date, and it doesn't really matter if it's a little past the best before date. This one actually is. Nobody cares. And you need about 500 grams, a little more. I like the organic yogurt. Don't use regular yogurt, please. The yogurt has to be probiotic. So what now? Now I get my big fork, and I use my big fork to mix it up. You see that? Ah, what a nice Schmooze. Now the soaker, oh, that's a fun thing. You can, if you have children, they love to do that. It's like playing in the mud. And if you don't use too much yogurt like I did, it is a little more dough-like. And I probably have to add tomorrow. When we actually bake the bread, I have to add a little bit more flour, but it doesn't matter. So this soaker, and it's important to incorporate all the flour, it will soak and ferment overnight out in room temperature. Not the lid tight, it needs a little air out of the way. The room temperature makes it better ferment, and it will remove part of the gluten, the phytates and the lectins. So now the second part of the pre-dough, it's called the Biga. It's quite an interesting process, and in my recipe I quote the book by Peter Reinhardt where I got the recipe originally from. I modified it to make it a little easier for me. It's called whole grain baking, not breaking. Whole grain baking, a great book. I just love it. There's not only this bread in it and a little bit more elaborate than what I do because I bake that every weekend and I don't have too much time. So I'm a little careless sometimes. So there we have our 554 grams of flour and now 2 grams of instant yeast. Now if you're yeast allergic, don't add yeast but add sourdough. It works with sourdough in a little different way. So this is for people that are not yeast allergic, that are not allergic to dairy, and that are not allergic to wheat. As I said, celiacs shouldn't use it because it's gluten, but if you just have a little gluten sensitivity, try it, it should be fine. Now this Biga is different because what happens is that we add about 170 grams, and I should leave it on the scale, of about room temperature water. So for me it must be 340. 340. And I use a little bit more because I have fresh flour and it soaks up more. There. And that you get with experience. And there's again mudding. Playing in the mud. Now which kid doesn't enjoy it? Playing in the mud. Now here we play in the mud. And you see it's pretty liquidy right now. And that's okay because it's freshly ground flour. It soaks up a lot of water. Now all you do is leave it for 5 minutes and I'll be back after that. Okay, the 5 minutes is done and you see when you look at it, it is much more harder. And the next step we do is the fun part, especially for kids. We go in with our hands and actually do a little bit, there's a little flour left, little bit of kneading, about for a minute or so. And kneading doesn't mean that you do it like that. You usually just punch the dough down, turn it over, punch it down, turn it over, punch it down, turn it over, until it's all nicely incorporated. That's it for this. What happens to that? It goes in the fridge until tomorrow. Now that is an interesting thing. I'm just washing my hands. Always use fresh towels to wash my hands. Now, what do we do with the rest of the flour? I add that to my flour container and I use the same that I use for my jam and jellies, a mason jar filler, to not make a mess. Because I want as much of the good flour as I can. And I need the bowl, so it doesn't matter when a little bit flour stays in the bowl, but not too much, because you want to weigh it. So there, see, the flour bowl is pretty clean. There's my flour. Now what do I do now? The big bowl goes on the scale. And again, we'll set it to 0. Perfect. Now we do the final dough that we will not need until tomorrow. But it's nice to do all the weighing once, and then you don't have to weigh anymore. So what I'll do, for 1 loaf it would be 56 grams, for 2 it's 112. Yeah, a little more. Okay, and we can adjust the flour tomorrow, obviously, the same for the water. Now, you need 5 grams salt for 1 loaf and 10 grams, obviously, for 2. And I always recommend use a little bit more if you use Himalayan salt to allow for the not as salty taste. It depends on your taste. You have to experiment a little bit. So, it's a little bit more. Okay, now yeast. It's this time, it's 7 grams. That's quite a lot, but it will all be absorbed. So I'll use 14. There we go. A little bit more. There. And I'm not a perfectionist. The bread is quite forgiving, I find. So now we have this mix here. And tomorrow we'll just add a little bit of a sweetener like honey, brown sugar, molasses, whatever you choose, and a little bit of avocado oil or melted coconut oil. But we can do that pie by thumb, as we say. Okay, now this goes in the fridge. This one here, the soaker is soaking. See, it's getting harder. We just try it tomorrow, and I'll see you again tomorrow.